Hi everyone, welcome. I'm preparing to check in on a couple worm bins that I've got out here on the bench already. They're the mixed red worms. And I think they've been fed 8 times in total, of which 6 of the feedings were coffee only. That's kind of the diet that we've got these guys on. So I've got an entire carton full of coffee here. And since that is the only food we're giving them, I give myself a little bit of latitude, so I could throw worm chow in there. I could be pretty creative on the bedding I include with their food, which is, like I said, coffee only. So those are the worms we're checking in on today. Well, let's get you guys a view of what's happening down here. The last check-in was 14 days ago, and like I said, the routine is pretty consistent here now. Over half a dozen feedings of coffee only. So I don't get that sense that I'm gonna end up with like a worm ball going on. Oops. And I can see my remote control got in the frame there. Sorry. I usually try to clear the view a little bit better before I start rolling. Look at this. Okay, unusual. Somehow a pile of worms ended up here on top of the up on top of the paper. This is like double paper out on these systems. I don't know if these are sugar bags or flour bags, but they're those double bags laid out here. A lot of times I'll just lay out newspaper as a single layer, perhaps fold it over, but these are doubled up paper bags, good tough bags. And it seems like they got themselves out on top of the bag and got stranded. But they found each other. I guess that's the happy ending. Alright, well, in a way I thought they might start spreading out or trying to take cover from the bright lights. Oh, I see these guys have all started scattering too, but nobody's got anywhere that they can hide. Because they're out on like a big plateau here. Oh, okay, this is part of the... yeah. Let's try flipping it over so we can better see what we got here. Okay, so there is another object here, which is a coffee filter. There was a time when we thought that coffee filters might be the only bedding we would use. Coffee would be the only food and coffee filters would be the only bedding, but that seemed a bit restrictive and was taken out of the equation pretty early on in the game. So I'm not going to worry about evicting worms off this paper here. We're just going to fold it over, let them remain in darkness so they quit panicking. And we can take care of giving them their next generous meal of yummy coffee. Alright. Just trying to evict the one little wormy off of that feeding zone indicator. So besides my prepared bedding, which is just a mix of shredded paper and cardboard and leaves, a damp mixture that I prepared a few days ago, should be nice and soft and ready for use. I've got more of this leafy stuff too that we can add at the end. So I think probably a good thing to do here would be to just start blending in the leafy matter, since part of the game plan is going to be to give them more. So the stuff that's out here on top will certainly get put to good use once it's blended into the material below. I'll tell you, when I start looking at material that looks like this, though, I start to wonder, is it really all the vermicompost or is it partly coffee? I guess one thing you don't have to worry about, I guess, in vermicompost that's produced in an environment like this is that it's not going to be full of seeds, so when you finally use it to plant your garden, you won't really, you won't end up with all kinds of volunteer tomatoes and whatnot trying to grow alongside whatever it is that you planted. Alright, so we're finally starting to break into the section in the middle where we usually feed. And I guess the other stuff we're bumping into here is just various materials that over time might have been used as a feeding zone indicator, but got so weathered, or for whatever reason it got promoted to be feeding zone bedding. There was part of a mango seed husk, I think, or whatever that was that I bumped into earlier. This might be, yeah, pieces of corn. So during those first 2 feedings, when we first came in here to feed these little guys, I guess corn must have been on the menu, because little chunks of corn are still holding up here. And I might have already started breaking them up. And if I wanted to, I could probably shred that piece of corn cob right there into a gazillion little pieces. For some reason, I always find myself trying to preserve this stuff instead of just helping it along to the finish line to be broken down. All right. But I was just curious of what other types of things we might encounter. Pumpkin stems. All kinds of funny little objects, but you know what? Let's get the tilling up of this edge over this side nearest me completed with the leaves getting blended all in, and give us a quick opportunity to see what the material in here looks like. Perhaps even bump into a couple additional pieces of old large bedding type materials that we can incorporate into our feeding zone. At least it'll make the feeding zone a little bit more interesting that way, I suppose. It will also complement it with some of my prepared bedding, some fresh stuff. Alright, this might also be, the way it breaks, you can tell right away that it's corn cob. Alright, so I guess digging a trench, I know sometimes I wonder if with this type of food that we're feeding, if I should just be sprinkling it in as I inspect the place and just let there be food throughout, everywhere. I did actually think about going about today's checking in that way and just end up having food scattered throughout. But whatever, here's the old stuff we collected along the way. Nice little handful of bedding of this type down here in the feeding zone, onto which a nice generous portion of coffee can get placed. And coffee is always my excuse to feed worm chow. So man, we totally got to almost got to the finish line on bin number 1, and we've not even looked at bin number 2. So why don't we do a similar inspection here? But usually when I'm running buddy bins or sister bins, brother bins, whatever you want to call these are, you know, identically configured and managed systems, usually with a fairly close population number. And I would almost guess that over time the populations probably do level off or become pretty consistent. Well, no, you know, that's not true. There are always those cases where you have certain systems where there's just so many worms in it that it's clearly a lot more than the neighboring bin. So, similar stuff. Husk of a mango seed. Piece of corn cob, which I resisted the urge to break again, as I always do for some reason. Getting into food hoarding mode. In the pumpkin stem. Everything else I thought I saw down here were just, you know, little scraps of leftover bedding from past feedings and whatnot, so we can set those aside so they can be thrown into our feeding zone. And I guess we'll just get to tilling up that side furthest away from me once we remove those objects that are piled up over there. So let's give them their feeding, and then we can just give that other end over there a little stir. I'm usually so much more regimented and sort of stick to the script. But sometimes I just feel like, hey, let's see if we can just kind of, you know, exit the highway and do a little off-road kind of free-form stuff. Perhaps mix up the order of things from the way I would normally do them. So I guess changing it up doesn't hurt, right? I think we've got ourselves a nice little feeding in there. Let's get these leaves up here, blended in too. And you know, I've been treating the coffee as a dry kind of a food, and most of the bedding I put in, you know, dry leaves sprinkled out on the top surface, and you know, nothing juicy basically. I guess that's my easiest way to think about it, to say I'm not putting anything juicy in here, nothing that brings moisture of its own with it into the system, no contribution from the foods as far as moisture content. So we're very dependent on the moisture level in here being sort of supplied by me and my wand. So, oh my goodness, it feels like we're gonna just run out of water here. I came ill prepared, not to mention there's no pressure in the bottle. I mean, it didn't feel like I needed much, but I just wanted to add something, so perhaps whatever we get here will be what they get, and hopefully it'll be enough to get them through the next time. You know, you saw how I had things covered here. I've got that double paper covering, but more importantly the bubble wrap on top of that, protecting from undue moisture loss or unwanted moisture loss. And you know, my regular box of leaves is running a little bit low, so once again, like I did in a recent feeding elsewhere, we're turning to my sort of special leaf collection, the stuff I screen down and make really fine so that I can use it in my prepared bedding. But I got pretty good supply of that stuff too. I think we'll be all right. So back on go the feeding zone indicators, which I didn't have replacements for today, but I'm glad to see that they're holding out pretty good. And then back on go these double bags, in this case sugar double bags. I mean, I found myself hoarding the weirdest things ever since I started raising worms. Double bag collection, egg carton collection, pizza box collection, cardboard tube roll collection. And that's just the beginning. I know I've got other things too. So that's it for our check-in with the now 100-day-old system, getting feeding number 9 after 2 weeks. And everything looks so nice in here. Hopefully the moisture that's in here, with us complementing it a little bit, will be good. And I think it will be, hopefully. If not, we'll be extra generous next time. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.